Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the reading room and our session across genres. I'm Rachna Singh, and today I will be in conversation with three multifaceted women writers who have been writing in and experimenting with different genres. So welcome to the reading room, Shinie, Bulbul, Gaea. Gaea is joining us virtually from Belgium. So let's get on with the conversation. Ladies and gentlemen of the audience, I promise you this is going to be a very interesting and engaging session where our writer panel will talk about the various aspects of writing in multiple genres and also read out from their books written in various genres. So without much ado, let's get the conversational ball rolling here. The literary space today, as we all know, is full of interesting possibilities with different, narrative forms, formats, genres, all of them merging, intersecting. But before we discuss these more complex nuances of writing, let's start with a very basic question, but one that I feel goes to the heart of the matter. And I would like all of you to respond to it. What draws you to writing in multiple genres? So, Shinie, please go first.
Hi everyone, thank you Rachna, and I'm so happy to be here with my friend Bulbul on the same panel. The thing about genres, I feel, is that they are largely man-made, and I'm really not interested in a man's world so much, but I'm very interested in how women think. What are they thinking? How do they manage expectations? What are their weapons for survival? Do they like cooking? And why do all homes come fitted with kitchens? So, what's happening really, really deep inside their hearts? And if that's a genre, then that's my genre.
Okay, so insight into a woman's mind and heart is what you're looking for. What about you, Bulbul?
Hello. First of all, this is not my sexy voice. This is my sore throat Jaipur voice, unfortunately. But to answer your question, I have written, first I started with short stories, which I love doing because wo jaldi se khatam ho jata tha. I didn't have to deal with an editor for 1 year. I could just finish it. Then I was asked to do a novel, so I did that. And then suddenly I decided to write a murder mystery. So I went into that genre. And that was a real pain because you had to remember what you wrote in the first chapter and not suddenly say, okay, ye to mar gaya tha, isko kaise tum wapas le aaye. So I am never going to do a murder mystery again, though I might just do it. So I love, unlike Shinie, I really love experimenting with different genres, but short stories about, not just about the family matters, which my novels mainly deal with, but I do a lot of short stories about nature, dealing with nature. And as I write for children too, I find the short story really is a very effective way of getting across.
So experiment for you seems to be why you write in so many genres. You've authored so many books across, various genres. You talked about stories and you talked about your murder mystery, and yours is, I think, a noir fiction also you've written. You've written psychological thrillers. So just give us a sense of, why you choose the genre that you do when you start a new project. For instance, if it's a noir fiction, what is the thought behind picking that up? And do you think of the genre before you start writing, or does it sort of organically grow out of your thought? What happens? Shinie, please.
No, Rachna, I do think the genre picks you. rather than you picking the genre. But just like Bulbul said, she writes about nature. Even the titles of her books are very much about flora and fauna. I think that's an author's sly way of coming into her own interests or passions. So for me, I really don't care how I come into the story, or if it's a poem, or it's an essay, it's a short story, it's a long form novel. I do keep this in mind, that how best can I showcase my heroine, my Naika, and what is she wanting to convey to the world, and which medium would she prefer? And
Okay.
I think that kind of, it's a good match that happens on its own, literally when you're asleep.
Okay.
Yeah, but like I said, I was telling you yesterday, no writing happens just because you're sitting on the keyboard and you're saying, now I'm going to write, now I'm
Yeah.
going to tell you a story.
Yeah.
It's like something that it's something that is going on at the back of your mind while you're just going about life and getting angry with maybe a cabbie, and deciding I don't want to eat this, and disciplining your students or children, or quote unquote disciplining, because they don't get disciplined. So it's something that happens, so that it literally looks like you sit on the computer and the story just comes to you on its own.
So like it's an organic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree with Shinie. Like when you sit down to write, sometimes I think I'm just going to do a short story. But then the characters, you get so fascinated, you get so involved by your own characters. If you must have noticed it. Anybody who writes fiction here will notice. They stay in your head, they take over your life. And then you say, no, I will expand this. I'll make it into a novella. Then from the novella, you say, no, I think they need more space. I don't want to let go of my characters. So then it becomes a novel. Of course, not everybody writes a suitable boy, which is like a, doorstop novel. But from short stories like the kernel, shall I say the kernel, the little seedling that you plant. And I think many classical writers started with, they write a short story and then eventually they turn it into a novel later on.
And do you have a favorite genre, Shinie?
I really do feel that every story comes with its own word count. Editors can tell you, a reader can tell you, your mom can tell you, beta isko aur lamba kar dete. For a long time, I think my mom was like, when are you going to write a real book? Because I was writing short stories. Yeah, so she felt like a novel would be good for me, for her to tell her friends, my daughter's a writer. But yeah, I do believe that every story has its own word count, and nobody can really make you trim it or lengthen it, because that's not how the story will work.
What about you,
Yeah,
Bulbul? Do you
she's
have
so
a favorite
right.
genre?
The reason I gave up writing short stories, my first book was a collection of short stories about the traveling women travelers in my family. I'm Bengali, and Bengalis travel all the time. They put on their sneakers before sneakers became fashionable, and they went all over. So I just wanted to stay with that. But I was asked by my publishers to write a novel because that gave you gravitas. Unless you'd published a novel, you were not really considered a writer. But that's changed now. I think people don't have that much time, so they love reading what is called metro reads. You can read it on your metro while commuting. So my favorite is still short stories. I love writing short stories.
Okay. So I think maybe we should get our panel to read out something, perhaps from a book that is your favorite, or maybe a genre that is your favorite. Shinie, would you like to read something for us?
Yeah. So this is a story that I wrote for a collection I put together for Penguin called Boo, which was supposedly scary stories. And I wrote about Eve, who is the world's first ghostess. Okay. I hope I won't forget the story, because then I'll have to refer to my notes. Once upon a time, there was no time, no once. Just he and me, a good man, a bad woman, naked and curious, just dying to know. But before that was a snake and a fruit. Apple, I think. I'm Eve, the world's first woman, fresh off the boat, chromosome XX. And Adam, too busy tracking water, rubbing stones for fire. No TV, no Wi-Fi. We get bored. I miss a period. And then one day I died, and I became a ghost. The world's first ghost, the world's first female ghost. Breasts, smoke rings, uterus, water vapor. I was just hanging around when I saw a man bash a woman up with her own baby. I moved close, I moved closer. I raised a hand, up came hers. I breathed in, she breathed out. Me, she, we hit him hard. No one sees me, they see only the meek woman with years of nodding behind her. On moonless nights, I paced words on girl tongues, fighting words. But enough about me, we ghosts have work to do. You there, open your gob, let me coat your sweet little tongue with dissent. Come, my beautiful descendant, we have a no to say.
Thank you. That was wonderful. That was wonderful. And interestingly, Shinie, in Eden Abandoned, you are starting from chapter 13 and then you go to ground zeros. So why did you use that narrative? I'm really curious to know.
Yeah, because I felt like I told the story backward.
Yeah.
You know, you have this woman who is, so Lilith or Eden Abandoned is about Adam's first wife. Adam met Eve actually much later. God created Adam and Lilith from the same elements of nature. So they were kind of created equally, and they had issues, which is why after she left him, he got another wife who was made from his own body and therefore would obey him and would be subservient to him. So the story of Lilith is, I don't want to go into the religion part of it. Is it Jewish? Is it Christian? Because I think all strong, powerful women of yesterday, they really didn't have a say. They were kind of rubbed out or delete, control, alt, delete. Some man would have pressed that button for them at some point. Yeah, so in Lilith's story, Lilith is celebrated a lot as a feminist icon, as somebody who stands for freedom, for liberation, for the modern day feminism itself. And interestingly, she is the patron demoness of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. Like all bad women of mythology, she is a seductress. She's very sexy. She has Bulbul's voice 24/7.
Yeah.
And she eats little babies. She finds them tasty. Yeah.
Naani aisa karti.
So, Bulbul, what are you going to read for us?
I'm going to read something. Oh, have you come on? I'll try and read. I'll see what my voice, sexy voice, allows me to read.
Sounds good, huh?
This is a book I wrote some time ago, and then I saw during COVID, 2.5 years, people would ring me up all the time asking me where to find this book because they were locked up in their houses and they were looking out. They were looking at their gardens and looking at their trees, and whenever they could go for a little walk or whatever, they were suddenly, and they were together with their family, and their children were asking them questions, and the parents realized that they had never had time to look before. So then my publishers reissued this book, and I put a little chapter about COVID. So I'll just read you from, it's a book, it's a nature rambler on Delhi. It's basically about Delhi's flora. The Kachnar is an elegant tree and was a great favorite of miniature painters. It can be seen forming the background to many Kangra miniature paintings. When the tree is in flower, it looks so beautiful that the Sanskrit name for it is Vanaraja, the king of the forest. The flowers of the Kachnar are orchid-like and have 5 long curved petals. Each petal has a fine pattern of veins which make it look translucent in the sunlight. It's part of the Bauhinia family. The flowers of various kinds of Bauhinia range from pure white to crimson pink, and the most beautiful tree are seen on the lower foothills of the Himalayas, where the trees grow much taller than in Delhi. You will see the flower bedecked tree sparkling on the hillside like a huge bouquet of orchids. They have a faint lavender-like scent which does not last long and floats away in the breeze like a faint memory. The leaves of the Kachnar are shaped like two kidneys joined together, and because of its twin formation, the tree got its name Bauhinia, in honor of the famous 16th century twin botanist Caspar and Jan Bauhin. I don't know if the famous twins ever tasted the pickle made with the green buds of Kachnar, but it's very popular in North Indian homes. A curry is made with the tender flowers and buds, and you can see the buds being sold in heaps in vegetable markets, though I always hesitate to buy them. Think of any flowers you're eating with each mouthful.
Thank you, thank you. That was wonderful. Now to the next aspect of, writing in multiple genres. Obviously, different genres have different literary conventions, formats, and storytelling techniques. So how do you approach this, switch from one genre to another? Are there...
I think you cannot hear me. Yes. I think you cannot hear me.
Now I can. Now we can. Wonderful.
Aha, wonderful. That would be really nice.
Yes. Wonderful to have you back on, Gaea.
Wonderful. I'm sorry I came in a bit late in the conversation.
No, I'm so relieved. So tell us, what draws you to writing in multiple genres?
I think I am just fascinated by all the different ways in which stories can be told. And somehow I also have the feeling that every story only has one form that really fits the story. So before I start to write a story, I have to know maybe first what the theme is, but also what the form of the story will be and how it can be told. And actually, I agree with what Shinie says. I think it's not a decision that you make as a writer. I think every story, in a way, chooses its own form and shows to a writer how it wants to be told. So I've told stories in many different forms and styles. Sometimes I write opera text, sometimes I write theater text, sometimes I write novels. I've written a children's book, and my next book will actually be a collection of short stories. Also because I think there is so many ideas still going around that if I have to turn each idea into a full novel, I will never make it. So I'm rather happy that with these short stories, I can catch 10 stories in one book.
Okay, great. So you also write novels, but you're also a screenwriter and a librettist and a journalist. You also write in different subgenres of novels, I remember when we were talking the other day, you told me that you started with a travel story, and your latest novel, Trofee, belongs to the colonial hunting genre, I think you said. So tell us a little more about these various genres that you have sort of embraced in your writing, in your novel writing.
I always try to find a way of storytelling that fits the particular story that I am writing. For example, in my first book, which is a book in which music played a rather large role, I started from a piece of music and I made an analysis of the musical piece. And then I tried to tell the story using this musical structure because I wanted to find out if it was possible to tell a story like music is told, which means that there is much more repetition, that themes come back, that motives come back, that several voices tell parts of the story, and that it sort of changes the way that the novel is built. With Trofee, because it is a novel about a man who goes hunting in Africa, I wanted to write a critique on the way that we are in these post-colonial times still dealing with Africa. And I found it very nice to use an old colonial way of storytelling to do this, because that's in a way very ironic to use precisely a colonial form to criticize colonialism. So I always look for a link between the subject of the story and the form or the shape of storytelling in which the story is written.
Okay, great. So would you like to read something out from your book, maybe Trofee, or whatever else you would like to?
I can read you a small part from the beginning of Trofee.
Wonderful. Please go ahead.
Like a bird of prey, the plane swoops from the pitch-black sky, pulls back, seems to hang there for a moment, motionless, and then begins a wide circling movement, as if it's hesitating between two potential victims and hasn't yet decided which it will pounce on. Ribbons of light take shape in the depths below, snipping the darkness into strips, with smaller lights moving over them like ants, scurrying towards each other, swarming together, clustering, then fanning out again. Beyond the specks of light, the land is dark, a gaping black hole, too dark even to see if it's flat or undulating. Recognizable patterns only emerge later, when the plane stops hesitating and drops further. Ridges surge up, valleys subside, water separates itself from land. There's not much time for watching. Now that the bird has chosen its prey, it dives swiftly down. Buildings can still be seen for a short time, trucks and cars. Then the landing gear hits the ground. David breathes again, but with no sense of relief. Instead, a feeling of heaviness instantly overwhelms him, as if the earth in this new land has a stronger pull on him and its air is harder to breathe. He has looked forward to this for years, day after day, and has dreamed about it for many nights. But now he's actually here, and he feels no joy or triumph, not even satisfaction. Although the plane has reached its destination, that's what the tiny voice of the flight attendant is telling him, in case he or one of the other passengers might doubt that they have arrived, what he is feeling now is not the joy of arrival, nor the relief of a man who has traveled a long time and has reached his goal after many hardships, celebrating the fact that he has survived, but the sadness of a leave-taking, as if he's carrying his whole route with him, as if every sacrifice he made on his journey clings to him, with all his weight.
Thank you. Thank you for that beautiful narration, Gaea. Now, like I was saying, different genres have different literary conventions, formats, storytelling techniques. So how do you approach the switch from one genre to another? I mean, are there certain challenges, or perhaps there are some advantages that you might have discovered? So if you could all throw light on that. And please feel free to read from your book wherever you want to substantiate a point that you're making.
I'm not going to read. She reads so beautifully without the text.
Yeah. So Shinie, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think it is short story. So when I'm reading, as a reader too, I find short stories everywhere. Like, Kite Runner was such a famous novel by Khalid Hosseini. And I remember it's written in 3 parts, part 1, part 2, part 3. Part 1 is written like literary fiction. It has Kabul and, growing up, being a childhood in Kabul. Part 2 is written very modern American prose. It's about yeah. It's about
Existentialism.
And part 3 is like your average whodunit, finding someone smuggling. I shouldn't give away the ending. There are many P.D. James novels where, in the end, the author adds a postscript. And that postscript is very psychological. It will be whatever caused the murderer to murder, whatever caused the victim to be a victim, is sometimes boiled down to grief or love or envy or something. And there's like an epilogue by the writer, which reads like a beautiful short story, standalone short story of its own. So yeah, so I feel I am, for some reason, programmed to see short stories in even when people talk. You'll find that they have a middle, a beginning, and an ending, and sometimes they start with the ending. Like my mother's jokes always end with start with the punchline with her laughing uproariously, and then she tells you the whole joke and the context of the joke and the end. So the way we talk in our dialogues, in our texting, in our letters, in our writing, I think for me, short story is what I pick out of the whole experience. So yeah, so when I write too, I think I gravitate towards short stories, and my so-called novels are actually novellas, which are a big tug of war first between me and my agent, who says, no, this is not a short story. You just need. I tell her this is like a long short story. Let's cut it into half. And she says, let's not do that. Let's just add things to it. And then I'll have the same tug of war with the editor also, who will say, you think you've said these things. Because that's another drawback of writing. Sometimes you have the story so deeply engraved in your head that you feel you've said it. You feel in the dialogues, you've said all this, and well, you haven't. So a good editor will always pick that out to you and come back to you. So when I was writing The Girl Who Couldn't Love, which was a short story to begin with, Renuka Chatterjee, my editor at Speaking Tiger, would gently just tell me, when I explain something, she would say, that's in your mind, it's not on the paper. So I think the longer form that I've been writing has been accidental. They become novellas because they were just actually unruly short stories who couldn't hold their words.
So the story strayed into being novellas, right?
That's so well put. I must remember to say this at the next session. So
what about you, Bulbul?
my favorite genre, like I said earlier, remains short story.
Yes.
Because I went to JNU, and then I went to Moscow State University to study and speak Russian. And I fell in love with Chekhov. I read a lot of Chekhov, and I did a sort of informal comparative study of Premchand, who had only read in school, and Chekhov, and saw a lot of similarities. And that power, I don't think I've ever be able to achieve that. The power to tell this story in just 3,000 or 2,000 words is a real skill. And novel, you have this huge canvas, thoda aage piche kar lo, ya theek nahi ho raha, you can do meander. It's like going on a scenic route somewhere. But in a short story, you're given that limited period. It's like, I'm a painter, so I'll give you a painting. Like watercolor, you can't make mistakes. You have your sheet of paper, you start your watercolor, if it goes wrong, you have to throw that paper away. But if you're working on oils and canvas, you can go on and on and on, it doesn't matter. So same thing with short story. You have to get it right. You have to get the beginning right, you have to get the middle right, and you have to get the end right. Otherwise it's gone, unless there's that sting at the end. And novel is more forgiving. But still, I love the short story.
No, that's okay. There are a lot of novels which are actually just short stories, and they've been stretched long because the author is so self-impressed by their own brilliance, and they feel the story can go the distance. And as a reader, I have felt that. And I just feel that it's better that somebody reads your book and says, अरे आपने तो खींच के बोल दिया, ये तो छोटे में भी बोल सकते थे. It's better to hear, I wish you had written more.
So,
An anecdote to this.
Okay, sure,
It's nothing
please.
to do with writing. About just genre, just separately. When she said, "Apne to खींच छोटे में बोल सकते थे," when I wrote my first book, like I told you, it's about my women in my family traveling. A lot of Bengali ladies came up to me and say, "Why have you written about us? What's so great about us? Why didn't you write about some historical character?" And even their children said, "Why have you written about Mashis and Pishis?" So sort of saw themselves as small, insignificant women who didn't have to be noticed.
Okay, great. So, Gaea, I have a specific question for you because you are a librettist. That is, you write text for operas and other vocal work. So tell us, how does writing for an opera differ from the other forms of writing you do, the novel or the journalistic piece that you write?
I think the biggest difference is you do not write alone. You actually co-create a story with 3 people, because there is you, and there is, of course, the composer of the music, and there is also the stage director who will tell the story on stage. And the tricky thing is you have to tell one story with these 3 different media,
Yes.
which can be very complicated, because if the 3 of you tell the same thing, it becomes very Mickey Mouse-like and too much. But if there is gaps in the story, then it's impossible to still understand. So you have to find a way to cooperate on this story. That's one difference. The other thing which I like very much about opera is that it in itself has like a double tempo. You have the narration, which is actually going forward, and usually the dramatic arc is rather tight, and you want the story to really keep moving. But then you have these standstill moments where there is areas that really go into the emotion. And I really like it that as a writer, you can sort of stop in the middle of your story and suddenly go, like, zoom in on the emotion of a character and dwell there for a while. And then there is one last thing that is very typical for opera, which I also like, and that it's a universe which is fully not realistic. Because if you have to believe that people who are dying can still sing for 2 hours, then you already sort of accepted that you're not in reality. Which means that you can do things which in normal novels are not so easy to make an audience believe them. And therefore, I love the universe of opera.
Okay, great. So,
You should come and see some Hindi movies.
yeah,
Precisely.
exactly.
I think they are rather linked
Yeah,
in
I
a way.
mentioned to Gaea the other day, the lyrics in our Hindi films are a little similar to what you do when you write operas, right? So, like you said, Gaea, this is, all about collaboration with composers and performers when you're writing an opera. So this is very different from the more solitary nature of writing a novel or even a journalistic piece. So how do you prepare yourself for that switch, from writing an opera and writing a novel?
Well, usually, actually, it's just the deadline or the schedule that decides, because very often for opera, it starts with the composer who asks for a libretto and it has to be finished in time. The other thing with a novel is, because you're alone with it, you have to figure it out with yourself when you write it and when you want it to be finished. But also, I wanted to say, I agree with what Bulbul said earlier, that the shorter the genre is, so if it's like a short story, or even worse, if it is a poem, then it becomes much scarier. Because in a novel, if you write like 1 page which isn't perfect, maybe no one will see it. But in a short story, it's already much more important. And poetry really, in a way, frightens me, because if 1 word is wrong, it's like already 15% of the poem can be wrong.
Yes.
So I also feel less at ease with shorter genres.
Okay, great. So I had a lot of questions to ask all 3 of you, but I think we are running out of time. So I'll hop, skip, and jump to one question that I would like all of you to respond to. Have you ever encountered resistance or challenges from readers or publishers when crossing genres? Because normally you are put in a box by the publishers or the literary agents, the readers, that this is a women-centric novelist, or this writer writes noir fiction or writes biographies. So how do you push back against this kind of, categorization? So Shinie, yeah.
I can only compare it to, again, like the way I have always tried to write about women, especially because we are told that at 40 we disappear. We are not seen after 40. So when we are young and you enter a lift, then even if there's a postman standing with you or the neighborhood uncle, they all just stare at you. There's no word spoken, but they just stare at you. But once you cross 40, apparently you enter the lift and nobody can see you. I mean, it's like this invisibility cloak. So I'll just read one line from one of my stories too,
Sure, please.
if we have time. She had often heard people say FO, but never really seen someone actually fuck off. So undocumented and little known, this act of fucking off. Now told to FO, she went with intuition and gut feeling to go with the flow of FO. Thanks.
Okay, Bulbul, what about you?
Because my first book was a travel.
You'll need to take the mic. Huh?
I'm getting so excited about talking to you guys, forgotten the mic. So my first book, as I told you, was a travel writing. So then they said, okay, do another travel writing. But I'm actually quite dyslexic and my attention span is very limited. So I'd already lost interest in the travel writing. I said, no, I'll do food stories. So I wrote a book about, it's called Anger of Aubergines, which is still in print actually. And it's been translated to many languages. So then everybody said, okay, she's a food writer. Get her to write more food stories. So I did 2 more books on food. Then I decided no more food. So I will do a novel. I did novel. So I kept jumping. I'm a bit disloyal to a genre, shall I say. But now I've returned to my first love, which is short story.
What about you, Gaea? Any trouble with publishers?
Yes, I think people always expect you to stick to what you have been doing before, especially if it worked well, because they then think that the audience will follow. But I like to challenge myself by changing genre every book that I write. So if I write a novel, then I want to do a children's book next, because I want to swap this expectation, and I also want to keep myself fresh. I want to avoid that I start like repeating a trick of which I know that it works. And luckily I found a publisher who accepts that I am very difficult to put in a box, and that sees it as maybe as a richness and not as a problem. But very often people want to like put you in a certain box. That's absolutely true.
Yes, that's right. So I think we've touched the limits of the time available to us.
Rachna, can I ask you? There's like a few minutes.
We'll need to go back to the audience for questions some other time. Okay, so thank you so much, Bulbul, Shinie, and Gaea, for making this session so enlightening, so informative and engaging, soul-nourishing, I would say. And now it is the turn of the audience. We are open for questions. Please, could you get the mic? All right.
Yes, hello. I wanted to know, like you'd mentioned that when you're writing a short story, sometimes you're told to make it into a novel or a novella. So how do you come up with content which sort of serves as fillers to give it that length?
So would you like to respond, Shinie, Bulbul, both of you?
Shinie.
Yeah, so when I wrote a long short story, which was eventually a novella, it wasn't about fillers. Because if you're going to put fillers or synthetic stuff which is not related to your story, it wouldn't be authentic. So if for the writer it's not an authentic feeling to write, then for the reader it won't be an authentic vibe to read. So for me, it's more like, what have you missed out? What is it that you've left unsaid because you want kind of the reader to meet you halfway? So in that whole process of wanting your reader to meet you halfway, maybe you move like, it's like a little dance between the reader and the writer, and you just like take a step forward, but you're not going sideways. You're not thinking, I need to lengthen this with words. You need to lengthen it with a meaning which is contextual to your story.
Yeah, I agree with Shinie. Because if you know where the short story is ending, it asks for its ending itself. When you're writing a short story, you'll see it approaching like a car, self-driven car. It just, it's the end. And if you want to stretch it out, it becomes very boring for you as a writer. So you can imagine how boring it will be for the reader. So this filling out, I don't think works.
All right. The next question.
So this question has just been answered partly as a response to the last question. I wanted to ask you, it comes from your Bulbul thesis on Premchand, Munshi and Chekhov, and you found quite a few similarities in their style. But on the contrary, when I read Premchand, Munshi and Chekhov, I find one very contrasting, there's an observation that most of the Indian writers, just like Premchand Munshi was the one who I think started this modern literature movement in short stories and in novels. There's this element of unsaid, which is not part of the storytelling which we have in India. Everything is everything is told. It's again that cliched show, not tell. But I find Chekhov, like you said, expecting the reader to meet halfway. So Chekhov does that a lot, which makes you participate along with the writer, which I find, along with Premchand Munshi, it is missing mostly in the Indian fiction writing. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, that's a very intelligent observation, I must say. But what I find similar in their thing was their treatment of the common man, the common situation, the everyday situation. And that's what Chekhov wrote about. He had innate sympathy for just a person just walking on the road. He'd write about him. And so did Premchand. That was the similarity I was talking about. But I find your observation very interesting.
Okay, the next question, please. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the conversation. I have two short questions. One to Gaea. I can see that there is a piano behind you. And my question, I guess you are a pianist also, yeah? So, no. But I wanted to ask you, is it easy to compose music or write a short story? Are there any similarities? And one more question to Bulbul, because I absolutely love Chekhov, and I wonder what is your favorite story and how actual is Chekhov today?
Okay, Gaea, can you go first?
As for the piano, it's I'm still not able to play music and not even really able to read music, but we use it very often when I work with composers to give me an idea of the music of an opera as it is evolving, so that I can adapt the way that I write to the music. Because at the moment that you write text, the music does not yet exist, which is always a tricky thing. The other thing is there a similarity to writing music and to writing stories or short stories? I'm certain there is, and it's what we try to find out, like how is this architecture of music being built and how is the architecture of the story being built? And if we work together, it's like you try to construct one house out of these two different art forms. But I think it also largely influences my writing, because the way that music can be constructed or can take shape is sort of a kind of writing that fills the way that I write novels. And it's also because I very often write for television or for film. Also, the screenwriting invades my writing, and sometimes it's very visual, sometimes it's very filmic. So I like to think about how all these different ways of telling stories function.
Bulbul. So your question was about Chekhov, yeah? I think he's very relevant in the Indian context, even today. And there's one story of him I was just trying to remember about these two old friends meeting. It's called Tolsti Tonki. They meet on the railway station. And they're childhood friends, and they love each other, and they meet with such joy. He introduces his family, and suddenly, I'll keep it very short, he realizes that this man is coming to this town to take over as his boss. And his whole body, I mean, the way beautifully shaped, it's been put in these 4 lines, that his whole body crumbles, and he becomes subservient. And that's such an, I would say a village, you can see that happening in India. वो बड़ा आदमी आ गया है, and he crumples and he starts bowing, and his whole friendship is gone. So Chekhov fits in the India context very well. I'm sorry to say, but he does.
So any more questions? Yes. Yes, please.
Have you ever come across a situation when you're writing a novel that after some time, the characters are totally out of control and you don't have any idea what they're doing?
That sounds like my life.
I think when you start writing the novel, you have these characters and you kind of tell them what to do. You have something set out for them. And after some time, the story tells you what is to be done. And the characters tell you what they want to do. And they really do completely take over. And it's always like a battle because you're like, no, 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 that's just too much. You can't wear a red sweater, maybe white. And they're like, no, today I'm going to wear red. So you just have to go with that.
And it's funny, may I add one thing very quickly, that how your readers react. You know, readers get very aggressive about your characters. I wrote this story about this, she was a poor relative in a family, and finally she gets a marriage proposal, and she refuses. She doesn't want to leave the family. So I was in Ambala, I was bird watching. I'm a bird watcher, I go all over the place. And this lady came up to me, she was introduced to me. She said, "Aapne Bala ko shaadi kyun nahi karni di? You know, why didn't you let Bala get married?" And she walked off.
Would you like to add to that, Gaea? Any comment from
No.
you on that?
I agree that it's always a balance between characters taking their freedom, which can be very good because it can feed your story. Very often they know better than you where they want to go. But you also have to sort of limit them when they want to go fully astray. I agree with what Shinie said. At a certain point, you have to just tell them, I'm sorry, I am the writer, and that is too far.
Yeah. So thank you for being such a great audience, and applause for our panel here, Shinie, Bulbul, Gaea, who joined us virtually.